The tension in the studio had shifted dramatically after Caroline's unexpected opening salvo. Stephen Colbert, usually the master of ceremonies, found himself navigating uncharted waters. The audience, initially primed to laugh at his jokes and applaud his clever quips, now seemed unsure of how to react. Their energy wavered between amusement and unease as they watched the dynamic unfold. It was clear that Karoline wasn't going to be a passive participant in this interview. She had come prepared to challenge the host on his own turf. Colbert, ever the professional, tried to regain control by steering the conversation toward safer ground. He asked a series of light-hearted questions about Karoline's upbringing and her journey into politics. "So tell us," he said with a playful grin, "what made you decide to leave behind the quiet life of small-town America for the chaos of Washington, D.C.? Was it the glamour? The power trips?" Karoline smiled politely, but there was a glint of determination in her eyes. She knew exactly what Colbert was doing, trying to paint her as someone who craved attention or status. Instead of taking the bait, she turned the question around. "You know, Stephen," she began, leaning forward slightly, "I think people often misunderstand why anyone goes into public service. For me, it wasn't about glamour or power. It was about making a difference. Growing up, I saw how policies shaped lives, sometimes for better and sometimes for worse, and I wanted to be part of the solution." Her answer caught Colbert off guard. He hadn't expected her to pivot so seamlessly from his joke to a heartfelt explanation, but instead of letting her response linger, he quickly moved on, attempting to steer the conversation back to more controversial territory. "Fair enough," he said, nodding approvingly before launching into his next line of questioning. "But let's talk about some of those policies you've supported. Critics have called them divisive, even harmful. How do you respond to that?" This was classic Colbert, a subtle jab disguised as curiosity. By framing the question this way, he hoped to put Karoline on the defensive, forcing her to justify unpopular stances while he sat back and observed. But Karoline didn't flinch. Instead, she took a deep breath and delivered a measured response. "Well, first of all, I'd argue that any policy worth discussing is bound to spark debate. If something doesn't challenge the status quo, does it really matter? That said, I understand why some people disagree with my positions. What concerns me isn't the disagreement itself. It's when we stop listening to each other altogether." Her words resonated with a surprising depth, cutting through the usual banter of late-night television. For a moment, the audience seemed to forget they were watching a comedy show. They leaned forward, intrigued by the sincerity in Karoline's voice. Even Colbert paused, momentarily struck by the gravity of her statement, but he quickly recovered, shifting gears once again. "Listening is great and all," Colbert said, adopting a mock-serious tone. "But let's face it, politics isn't exactly known for its civility these days. Don't you think some of your critics might say you're just as guilty of ignoring opposing viewpoints as anyone else?" It was a clever move, designed to make Karoline appear hypocritical, but instead of falling into the trap, she countered with precision. "That's a fair point, Stephen," she replied, maintaining eye contact. "And honestly, if I ever stopped listening to opposing viewpoints, I'd want someone to call me out on it. But here's the thing, listening isn't the same as agreeing. We can hear someone out without compromising our principles. In fact, I'd argue that real progress happens when we engage with ideas that challenge us, not when we shut them down." The audience erupted into applause, though it was mixed. Some cheered enthusiastically, clearly impressed by Karoline's poise and clarity. Others clapped hesitantly, perhaps uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. Colbert, sensing the shift in momentum, decided to push harder. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with a smirk. All right, he said, feigning exasperation. "Let's get specific. You've been vocal about insert hot-button issue. Care to explain why you think your stance is the right one?" Here was where Colbert excelled, forcing guests to defend their beliefs under pressure. He expected Karoline to stumble, to hedge her answers, or to retreat into vague generalities. But she did none of those things. Instead, she laid out her argument with remarkable clarity, citing data, personal anecdotes and historical context to support her position. Each point she made was concise yet compelling, leaving little room for Colbert to interject with snarky remarks. As the segment continued, Colbert grew increasingly frustrated. His attempts to undermine Karoline's credibility were met with calm, logical responses that deflected his attacks. At one point, he made a sarcastic comment about patriotism, suggesting that conservatives like Karoline only invoked national pride when it suited their agenda. "Oh, come on," he said, rolling his eyes theatrically. "Isn't waving the flag just a convenient way to avoid tough conversations?" The audience laughed nervously, unsure whether to side with Colbert's humor or Karoline's seriousness. But Karoline seized the opportunity to turn the tables. Fixing him with a steady gaze, she replied, "Funny you should mention patriotism, Stephen. Last week you tweeted support for protesting athletes, but didn't those same athletes stand accused of disrespecting the very flag you claim to love? Isn't that hypocrisy worth discussing?" The room fell silent. Colbert blinked, momentarily stunned. He hadn't anticipated such a direct confrontation, or such a well-timed rebuttal. The audience, too, seemed frozen, unsure how to react. For the first time in years, Stephen Colbert appeared genuinely rattled. His confident grin faltered, replaced by a look of uncertainty. He stammered through a weak response, but it was too late. Karoline had exposed a contradiction in his own rhetoric, and the audience could feel it. Backstage, the crew exchanged nervous glances. One producer whispered to another, "Is this really happening?" Meanwhile, Karoline remained composed, sipping water during a brief pause as though nothing unusual had occurred. Her demeanor exuded calm confidence, a stark contrast to Colbert's growing agitation. When the commercial break finally arrived, the atmosphere in the studio was electric. The audience buzzed with quiet murmurs, debating what they had just witnessed. Some praised Karoline for standing her ground, while others defended Colbert, insisting he was simply doing his job. Regardless of their opinions, one thing was undeniable. This was shaping up to be one of the most memorable interviews in late-night history. As the cameras rolled again after the break, Colbert attempted to regain his footing. He cracked a few jokes, hoping to lighten the mood, but the damage had been done. Karoline's earlier comments lingered in the air, casting a shadow over his usual antics. Determined to salvage the interview, he shifted tactics, asking softer, less confrontational questions. Yet even then, Karoline managed to inject substance into every answer, refusing to let the conversation devolve into mere entertainment. By the time the final segment wrapped up, it was clear that something extraordinary had taken place. Karoline Leavitt had not only held her own against one of late-night television's sharpest minds, she had bested him. As the credits rolled and the audience filed out of the studio, whispers of disbelief filled the air. Backstage, Colbert shook Karoline's hand with a mix of admiration and frustration. "You're good," he admitted quietly, a hint of respect in his voice. Karoline smiled graciously. "Thank you, Stephen. I hope this sparks some meaningful conversations." And with that, she walked away, leaving behind a legacy that would soon ripple far beyond the confines of the studio. Karoline Leavitt was not your everyday public figure. She had a story that seemed almost too good to be true, a tale of determination, grit, and an unshakable belief in herself. From the outside, her journey looked like something straight out of a movie. Born into a middle-class family in a small town, Karoline grew up watching debates on TV with her father, who always encouraged her to think critically and speak her mind. Those early years planted the seeds for what would later become her defining trait: the ability to articulate complex ideas clearly and confidently. Her career began in politics, where she quickly made a name for herself as a press secretary. It wasn't long before people noticed how effortlessly she handled tough questions from reporters. Whether it was addressing controversial policies or defending decisions under intense scrutiny, Karoline never backed down. Her calm demeanor and sharp intellect became her trademarks. But it wasn't just about being smart. It was about connecting with people. Even when she disagreed with someone, she did so respectfully, making sure her point came across without alienating others. This skill earned her respect from both sides of the aisle, which is no small feat in today's polarized world. As her reputation grew, Karoline realized she wanted to do more than just work behind the scenes. She decided to step into the spotlight, writing books and appearing on television to share her perspectives. Each appearance added another layer to her growing fame. People admired her honesty and appreciated her willingness to tackle difficult topics head-on. Unlike many commentators who relied on sensationalism to grab attention, Karoline focused on substance. She believed that meaningful conversations could bridge divides, even if they didn't always lead to agreement. Her approach resonated deeply, with audiences who were tired of the same old shouting matches dominating news programs. One day, while scrolling through emails during a quiet morning at home, Karoline saw an invitation that stopped her in her tracks. It was from The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, one of the most popular late-night talk shows in America. The email read simply, "We'd love to have you as a guest." At first, she thought it might be a prank. After all, why would Stephen Colbert, a comedian known for his biting satire, invite someone like her onto his show? But after verifying its authenticity, excitement bubbled inside her. This was a chance to reach millions of viewers, many of whom likely held opposing views. If played right, it could be an opportunity to break stereotypes and foster understanding. But Karoline knew better than to walk into such a high-stakes situation unprepared. Over the next few weeks, she immersed herself in research. She watched countless episodes of The Late Show, studying Colbert's interviewing style. He often started with lighthearted banter, but quickly shifted gears, using humor to disarm guests before launching into tougher territory. His favorite tactic? Taking their words out of context to make them look foolish. While some guests laughed along nervously, others stumbled over their responses, giving him exactly what he needed, for comedic gold. Karoline understood that Colbert thrived on unpredictability. He loved catching people off guard. But she also knew his game plan inside and out. She spent hours rehearsing potential scenarios with friends and colleagues, preparing answers to every possible question. They role-played different versions of Colbert, throwing curveballs to test her composure. Sometimes they pushed her to the brink of frustration, mimicking Colbert's smirking tone or interrupting her mid-sentence. But each session sharpened her focus and strengthened her resolve. By the time the big night arrived, Karoline felt ready for anything. Social media buzzed with anticipation in the days leading up to the interview. Fans of Colbert speculated about how he'd handle having a conservative commentator on his show. Would he roast her mercilessly? Or would he surprise everyone by giving her a fair platform? Meanwhile, Karoline's supporters rallied behind her, urging her to stay true to herself and reminding her of the importance of representing their side with dignity. Memes flooded Twitter, with hashtags like "Yar to Colbert vs. Leavitt" trending nationwide. Everyone wanted to know, could Karoline hold her own against the late-night legend? On the evening of the taping, Karoline arrived at the studio feeling surprisingly calm. Dressed in a sleek navy blue suit that exuded professionalism yet hinted at confidence, she walked onto the set with a smile that masked her inner nerves. The energy backstage was electric, with crew members rushing around making final preparations. As she took her seat across from Colbert, she glanced at the packed audience, buzzing with excitement. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to absorb the magnitude of the moment. Millions of eyes would soon be glued to their screens, waiting to see how this showdown would unfold. When the cameras finally rolled and the bright lights illuminated the stage, Colbert greeted Karoline warmly, introducing her as a rising star in the world of political commentary. His charm was undeniable, and his opening remarks drew laughter from the crowd. But beneath his polished exterior, Karoline sensed the storm brewing. She knew the real challenge lay ahead, and she was determined to face it head-on. Little did anyone realize that this seemingly routine interview would turn into one of the most talked-about moments in television history. The tension between Karoline and Colbert simmered beneath the surface, invisible to most but palpable to those paying close attention. As the conversation began, Colbert adopted his usual playful tone, teasing Karoline about her recent rise to prominence. "So, Karoline," he said with a grin, leaning back in his chair. "You've been described as a voice of reason. Isn't that just code for someone trying to sell books?" The audience erupted in laughter, clearly enjoying the familiar dynamic they'd come to expect from Colbert's interviews. But instead of laughing along or offering a rehearsed comeback, Karoline remained composed. Her expression didn't change. Not a flicker of irritation or discomfort crossed her face. When the applause died down, she leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with Colbert. With a calmness that bordered on unsettling, she replied, "Actually, Stephen, I think we can skip the theatrics. If you want to have a real conversation, I'm here for it. But if you're more interested in performing for your audience, then maybe we should just wrap this up now." For a split second, the room fell silent. No one, not even Colbert, had anticipated such a direct response so early in the interview. The host blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. His confident smirk faltered as he processed her words. Was she serious? Did she really mean to call him out like that? The audience, sensing the shift in energy, grew quieter, unsure whether to laugh or wait for Colbert's next move. Colbert recovered quickly, masking his surprise with a chuckle. "Oh, come on, Karoline," he said, attempting to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "You know I'm just having fun. Let's lighten things up a bit, shall we?" But Karoline wasn't budging. She sat upright, her posture relaxed but commanding, refusing to let him regain full control of the narrative. "You're absolutely right, Stephen," she said, her voice steady and measured. "This is supposed to be fun, but I think there's a difference between having fun and turning an interview into a performance. If we're going to talk about important issues, don't you agree that deserves our best effort, not just punchlines?" Her response hung in the air, heavy with implication. The audience, initially eager to cheer for Colbert, hesitated. Some clapped politely, unsure of how to react, while others exchanged puzzled glances. Even the band, usually quick to fill awkward pauses with upbeat music, stayed silent. For the first time in recent memory, Colbert found himself on the defensive. His carefully crafted persona, the witty, charming host who always had the upper hand, was being challenged in a way he hadn't expected. Sensing the weight of the moment, Karoline pressed gently but firmly. "Look, I respect what you do here. You bring humor to serious topics, and that's valuable. But humor shouldn't come at the expense of truth or fairness. So tell me, are we having a conversation tonight, or am I just part of your act?" Colbert forced a smile, though it lacked his usual ease. "Well, Karoline," he said, trying to sound jovial, "I suppose we'll find out together, won't we?" The line garnered scattered laughter, but it was clear the dynamic had shifted. Karoline had drawn a line in the sand, and Colbert, whether he liked it or not, was now navigating unfamiliar territory. What followed was a delicate dance, with each participant testing the other's boundaries. Colbert lobbed a series of softball questions, hoping to ease the tension and reassert his dominance. Yet Karoline answered each one with precision, avoiding traps and steering the discussion toward substantive topics. When Colbert joked about her stance on a contentious policy issue, she responded with a thoughtful explanation that left little room for mockery. And when he tried to paint her views as extreme, she calmly pointed out inconsistencies in his framing, forcing him to rethink his approach. By the end of the first segment, it was evident that this was no ordinary interview. Karoline Leavitt had entered the lion's den, and instead of cowering, she had begun to tame the beast. The audience, once certain of where their loyalties lay, now found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew. Colbert, meanwhile, realized he was facing a formidable opponent, one who wouldn't be easily dismissed or disarmed. As the interview continued, Stephen Colbert tried to regain his footing. He knew he couldn't let Karoline Leavitt dominate the conversation. It wasn't just about pride. It was about maintaining the essence of his show. The Late Show thrived on its host's ability to entertain while subtly dismantling opposing viewpoints. But this time, something felt different. Karoline wasn't playing along with his usual game of verbal sparring. Instead, she was rewriting the rules right in front of him, and the audience could feel it. Colbert decided to take a new approach. He shifted gears, moving away from direct attacks and focusing instead on broader societal issues where he believed his humor would shine brightest. "Let's talk about education," he said, leaning forward with a mischievous grin. "You've been vocal about school choice programs. Critics argue that these policies undermine public schools and hurt low-income families. What do you say to them?" It was a calculated question, designed to paint Karoline as someone indifferent to the struggles of underprivileged communities. The audience perked up, ready for another round of Colbert's signature satire. They expected Karoline to stumble or grow defensive, giving Colbert the opening he needed to deliver his punchline. But once again, Karoline surprised everyone. She paused briefly, collecting her thoughts before responding. Her tone remained calm but firm. "I appreciate the concern," she began, "because I share it. Every child deserves access to quality education, regardless of their zip code. The problem is, our current system often fails students who need help the most. School choice isn't about undermining public schools. It's about empowering parents to make decisions that work best for their kids." Her words carried weight, especially when she added personal anecdotes. She spoke about meeting families trapped in failing school districts, unable to afford alternatives. Imagine being a parent watching your child fall behind year after year because the only option available doesn't meet their needs. Shouldn't they have the freedom to seek better opportunities? That's what school choice is really about, giving hope to those who feel forgotten. The audience, initially prepared to laugh at Colbert's quips, found themselves listening intently. Some nodded in agreement while others exchanged thoughtful glances. Colbert, sensing the mood shifting, attempted to counter her argument with humor. But isn't it easier to blame the system than fix it?" he quipped, raising an eyebrow. "After all, if we just throw money at the problem, won't everything magically improve?" Karoline didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she smiled, slightly, as though she'd anticipated his response. "Throwing money at problems rarely works," she agreed, surprising both Colbert and the audience. "But neither does ignoring them. Public schools deserve resources, yes, but they also need accountability, and families deserve options. It's not an either-or situation. It's about finding solutions that actually work." Her answer left Colbert momentarily speechless. He hadn't expected her to agree with part of his critique, only to pivot so effectively back to her original point. For the first time, his comedic timing faltered. He glanced at the teleprompter, searching for his next line, but nothing seemed quite right. The audience, too, was caught off guard. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Determined to reclaim control, Colbert pressed on, tackling another contentious topic: healthcare. "All right, let's switch gears," he said, adopting a mock-serious expression. "Healthcare reform. You've supported policies that critics call heartless. How do you respond to people who say your ideas leave vulnerable populations behind?" This was Colbert's bread and butter, a loaded question designed to force Karoline into a corner. But instead of panicking, she leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "Stephen," she said, her voice steady, "I think we can all agree that no one should go bankrupt because they get sick. But the real question is, what kind of system ensures affordable, accessible care for everyone? Too often, debates around healthcare devolve into slogans without addressing the complexities involved." She went on to explain her perspective, breaking down complex policy proposals into simple terms anyone could understand. She acknowledged the challenges faced by low-income individuals and emphasized the importance of balancing compassion with practicality. "We can't solve problems by pretending they're simpler than they are," she concluded, "and we certainly can't demonize each other for wanting the same outcomes: better health and lower costs." The audience erupted into applause, this time more enthusiastic than before. Even some of Colbert's staff members exchanged impressed looks. Karoline wasn't just defending herself, she was reframing the entire conversation. She refused to engage in the divisive rhetoric that dominated modern politics, opting instead for clarity and empathy. Sensing he was losing ground, Colbert tried one last tactic. He brought up social media, knowing it was a topic guaranteed to spark controversy. Social media influencers, you've criticized them for spreading misinformation? Isn't that ironic, considering how much politicians rely on platforms like Twitter to push their agendas? Karoline chuckled softly, recognizing the irony. You're absolutely right, she admitted. Politicians, journalists, even late-night hosts, we all use social media to amplify our voices. The difference lies in responsibility. When I post something, I ensure it's accurate. When others spread falsehoods, they risk eroding trust in institutions. It's not about banning opinions, it's about holding people accountable for the information they share. Her response disarmed Colbert yet again. By acknowledging the validity of his point while reinforcing her own stance, she demonstrated a level of nuance rarely seen in televised debates. The audience clapped hesitantly, unsure whether to cheer for Colbert's cleverness or Karoline's poise. The energy in the room had shifted entirely, from entertainment to engagement. Behind the scenes, the producers whispered frantically. One suggested cutting to a commercial early, fearing the segment might spiral out of control. Another argued against it, pointing out that viewers were glued to their screens. Whatever happened next, it was clear this interview was unlike anything they'd produced before. When the final commercial break arrived, Colbert took a deep breath, visibly frustrated. He glanced at Karoline, who sat calmly, sipping water as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. You're tough, he muttered under his breath, half joking but clearly impressed. Karoline smiled warmly. Just doing my job, Stephen. Thanks for having me. As the cameras rolled again for closing remarks, Colbert attempted to lighten the mood with a few jokes. But the tension lingered, a testament to the impact of what had transpired. When the interview ended, the audience gave Karoline a standing ovation, a rare occurrence for a guest on The Late Show. Backstage, crew members gathered around monitors, replaying key moments and marveling at how effortlessly Karoline had turned the tables. For Colbert, the experience was humbling. He prided himself on his ability to outwit guests, using humor to expose contradictions and highlight flaws. Yet here was someone who not only matched his wit, but surpassed it with substance and grace. As he walked off stage, shaking hands with Karoline and offering quiet praise, he couldn't shake the feeling that this night would be remembered, not just by him, but by millions of viewers worldwide. And as Karoline stepped into the cool, new York night, surrounded by flashing cameras and reporters eager for sound bites, she allowed herself a small smile. She hadn't come to destroy Stephen Colbert. She'd come to speak the truth. And in doing so, she had sparked a conversation that would resonate far beyond the confines of a late-night talk show. The final moments of the interview were unlike anything anyone in the studio or watching at home had ever seen. Stephen Colbert, a man known for his quick wit and ability to dominate any conversation, seemed to be running out of tricks. Karoline Leavitt, on the other hand, remained as composed as ever, her confidence unwavering. It was clear that she had not only prepared for this moment, but also understood the stakes. This wasn't just about winning an argument. It was about proving a point. That thoughtful, respectful dialogue could still cut through the noise of modern media. Colbert, sensing he needed to reclaim some ground, decided to bring up one of Karoline's past statements, a comment she'd made during a heated debate months earlier. Let me ask you this, he said, leaning forward with a sly grin. You once said that critics of your policies don't understand reality. Isn't that a little dismissive? I mean, doesn't everyone have a right to their opinion? It was a clever move, designed to paint Karoline as arrogant or closed-minded. The audience chuckled softly, expecting her to stumble over her words or backtrack defensively. But instead she smiled, a calm, knowing smile, and replied without hesitation. You're absolutely right, Stephen, she said. Everyone does have a right to their opinion. What I was referring to is something else entirely, the difference between opinions based on facts and those rooted in misinformation. Her response drew murmurs from the crowd. Some nodded in agreement while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Colbert, momentarily caught off guard by her poise, tried to recover. Okay, fair enough, he said, attempting to sound casual. But let's face it, Facts can be interpreted differently depending on who's looking at them. Isn't that true? Karoline didn't miss a beat. Of course they can, she replied. And that's why it's so important to have honest conversations. If we start dismissing facts altogether because they don't align with our beliefs, we're setting ourselves up for failure. Facts aren't partisan. They're tools for understanding the world around us. Her words resonated deeply, especially in an era where truth often felt like a moving target. The audience, which had been laughing at Colbert's jokes throughout, much of the interview now seemed divided. Some clapped enthusiastically, clearly moved by Karoline's sincerity. Others sat quietly, processing what they'd just heard. Even Colbert appeared momentarily unsure of how to respond. For someone who thrived on keeping guests off balance, he now found himself on shaky ground. Determined to regain control, Colbert shifted tactics yet again. He brought up a topic he thought would play to his strengths: hypocrisy. "All right, let's talk about consistency," he said, adopting a mock-serious tone. "You've criticized politicians for flip-flopping on issues. But don't you think everyone evolves over time? Shouldn't we give people room to grow?" It was a clever question, aimed squarely at exposing potential contradictions in Karoline's stance. But once again, she turned the tables with ease. "Absolutely," she said, nodding. "Growth is essential. It shows self-awareness and adaptability. But there's a difference between evolving and outright reversing positions to suit political convenience. When leaders change their minds, they owe it to the public to explain why. Transparency builds trust. Without it, people start questioning motives." Her answer left Colbert visibly flustered. He glanced at the teleprompter, searching for his next line, but nothing seemed to fit. The rhythm of the interview had completely changed. Where once he had danced circles around his guests, now he struggled to keep pace with Karoline's steady logic and composure. Realizing he needed to make a bold move, Colbert decided to go for broke. He brought up a lesser-known incident from his own career, an embarrassing moment that few remembered but that he knew could work against him if revealed. Karoline, however, had done her homework. She leaned forward slightly, her expression softening but her voice firm. "Actually, Stephen," she began, her tone measured but pointed, "let's talk about integrity. Because if memory serves me correctly, you once criticized a comedian for making light of serious issues, only to turn around and do the exact same thing yourself months later. Isn't that hypocrisy worth discussing?" The room froze. Every eye in the studio turned toward Colbert, who looked genuinely stunned. His confident smirk vanished, replaced by a fleeting look of panic. The audience, too, fell silent. The kind of silence that feels heavy and suffocating. No one, not even Colbert's most loyal fans, had expected such a direct confrontation. For a moment, it seemed as though time stood still. Colbert stammered, trying to formulate a response, but his usual charm eluded him. "Well, he managed, glancing at the cameras as if hoping for divine intervention. But there was no escape. Karoline had exposed a contradiction in his own behavior, one that struck at the heart of his credibility as a commentator. When the commercial break finally arrived, the atmosphere backstage was electric. Producers huddled together, whispering furiously about what had just happened. One suggested cutting the segment short, fearing the backlash that might follow. Another argued fiercely against it, pointing out that viewers were glued to their screens. Whatever decision they made, it was clear this interview would live on long after the credits rolled. Back on set, Colbert attempted to salvage the remainder of the show. He cracked a few jokes, trying to lighten the mood, but the tension lingered. The audience, initially eager to laugh along, now seemed uncertain how to react. Some clapped politely, while others sat in stunned silence. Karoline, meanwhile, remained, perfectly composed, her demeanor unchanged. She thanked Colbert graciously when the interview wrapped up, shaking his hand with a warmth that belied the intensity of their exchange. As the cameras cut to black and the house lights came up, the audience erupted into applause, a mix of admiration for Karoline's poise and disbelief at what they had just witnessed. Backstage, Colbert exhaled deeply, running a hand through his hair. "She's good," he muttered to a producer, half joking but clearly impressed. Really good. Karoline, for her part, walked off stage with quiet confidence. As she greeted members of the crew and posed for photos, she couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Not because she had won the interview, but because she had stayed true to herself. She hadn't come to tear anyone down. She had come to speak honestly and respectfully. And in doing so, she had sparked a conversation that transcended the confines of late-night television. By the time she stepped outside into the crisp New York air, surrounded by reporters eager for quotes and reactions, Karoline allowed herself a small smile. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Critics would dissect her performance. Supporters would celebrate it, and debates would rage online. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was that she had shown millions of viewers that authenticity and courage could still shine brightly, even in the most unlikely places. And as clips of the interview began circulating on social media, sparking endless discussions and debates, one thing became abundantly clear. Karoline Leavitt had not only held her own against Stephen Colbert, she had redefined what it meant to engage in meaningful dialogue on a national stage. The days following Karoline Leavitt's appearance on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert were nothing short of extraordinary. Clips from the interview spread like wildfire across social media platforms, capturing the attention of millions. Memes, GIFs, and hashtags flooded Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, with phrases like Karoline vs. Colbert and the studio silence trending globally. People couldn't stop talking about what they had witnessed, an underdog taking on a late-night legend, and emerging victorious. It wasn't just the substance of her arguments that captivated audiences. It was the way she delivered them. Her calm demeanor, sharp intellect, and unwavering authenticity resonated deeply in an era where shouting matches often passed for meaningful discourse. For conservatives, Karoline became an instant hero. Talk radio hosts praised her poise and preparation, calling her performance a masterclass in staying composed under pressure. Conservative news outlets ran headlines like, Karoline Leavitt shuts down Stephen Colbert, and the night late-night TV met its match. Supporters rallied around her, buying copies of her book in record numbers and sharing her interviews online. Bookstores struggled to keep shelves stocked as demand skyrocketed. Speaking invitations poured in from universities, think tanks, and conferences eager to hear directly from the woman who had taken on one of America's most beloved comedians, and won. But the reaction wasn't limited to one side of the political spectrum. Even some liberals found themselves admiring Karoline's approach. While many defended Colbert, others acknowledged that his usual tactics had fallen flat against someone so well prepared. Liberal commentators debated whether Colbert's reliance on satire had gone too far, leaving him vulnerable when faced with a guest who refused to play along. Articles appeared in major publications analyzing the dynamics of the interview, with titles like, Why Karoline Leavitt's Takedown Worked, and What Stephen Colbert Got Wrong About Civility. For the first time in years, late-night television became a topic of serious discussion, not just for its entertainment value, but for its role in shaping public opinion. As for Stephen Colbert himself, the aftermath was humbling. Ratings for EI's The Late Show dipped slightly in the weeks following the interview, not because viewers stopped tuning in, but because they began questioning the show's formula. Critics argued that Colbert's brand of humor, while effective in many cases, sometimes came across as condescending or dismissive. Some suggested he underestimated his opponent, allowing hubris to blind him to her preparation and intellect. Others pointed out that the interview highlighted a broader issue within late-night television, the tendency to prioritize laughs over genuine engagement. Colbert addressed the backlash during a subsequent episode, opening the show with a self-deprecating monologue. Well, folks, he said, standing center stage with his trademark grin, I think we can all agree I met my match last week. Karoline Leavitt didn't just come prepared, she came ready to win. And honestly, I respect that. If anything, it reminded me why I love doing this job. You never know who's going to walk through that door and challenge you in ways you don't expect. His audience laughed and applauded, appreciating his ability to acknowledge the moment with grace. But behind the scenes, Colbert reportedly spent hours reflecting on the experience. Friends close to him revealed that he felt a mix of frustration and admiration. Frustration at being caught off guard, yes, but also admiration for someone who could hold their own in such a high-pressure environment. He even reached out to Karoline privately, sending a brief note praising her composure and thanking her for pushing him to be better. "You made me work harder than I have in years," he wrote, "and for that I'm grateful." For Karoline, life changed almost overnight. Overnight bookings turned into weeks-long commitments and speaking fees soared. She appeared on morning talk shows, news programs, and podcasts, fielding questions from hosts eager to understand how she had pulled off such a remarkable feat. When asked about her strategy, she always gave the same answer. "I didn't go there to destroy anyone. I went there to speak the truth. And sometimes the truth is louder than any joke." Her newfound fame brought challenges as well. Critics scrutinized every word she said, searching for inconsistencies or weaknesses. Opponents dug up old speeches and tweets hoping to find anything that could undermine her credibility. But Karoline handled it all with the same grace and determination she had shown on Colbert's show. Instead of lashing out or retreating, she addressed criticisms head-on, using each opportunity to clarify her positions and deepen the conversation. Her transparency only added to her appeal, drawing in supporters who admired her willingness to engage openly. Perhaps the most significant impact of the interview, however, was its effect on the broader cultural conversation. In a world increasingly divided by ideology, Karoline's performance offered a glimmer of hope. Viewers from both sides of the aisle expressed appreciation for the civility and respect she displayed, qualities sorely lacking in many public debates. Letters poured in from ordinary people thanking her for reminding them that disagreement didn't have to mean hostility. Teachers incorporated clips of the interview into lesson plans, encouraging students to analyze how effective communication could bridge divides. Even politicians cited her example, urging colleagues to adopt a similar tone in their own discussions. Months later, as Karoline reflected on the whirlwind of events, she remained grounded. Sitting in her home office surrounded by stacks of books and notes for her next project, she smiled softly when asked about the legacy of that night. "It's funny," she said, leaning back in her chair. "People keep calling it a takedown or a victory, but that's not how I see it. To me, it was simply a chance to show that respectful dialogue is possible, even in spaces where it seems unlikely." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Look, I'm not naive. I know there will always be disagreements and not everyone is going to like what I say. But if we can approach those differences with honesty and empathy, maybe, just maybe, we can start moving forward together." Her words echoed far beyond the confines of a single television studio. They served as a reminder that courage and authenticity still mattered, even in an age dominated by sound bites and sensationalism. And while the buzz surrounding her interview eventually faded, its influence lingered, a testament to the power of speaking truth with conviction and grace. Years later, when historians looked back on the evolution of political commentary and late-night television, they would point to that fateful evening as a turning point. It wasn't just about Karoline Leavitt or Stephen Colbert. It was about the potential for meaningful conversations to transcend partisan divides and inspire change. And for Karoline, that was the greatest victory of all.